This week we're talking about the Valiant Queen Esther. And in our story this week, which is very exciting, there's a message for each one of us as well. The overall theme of this series is God has a plan, and this particular talk has the central idea of our lives have meaning. They have meaning and have a deeper meaning that we can see on the surface. So, have any of you ever sensed that there's more to your life than you're currently living? Have you thought that there's more that you should do, something you're being called to but you don't know what it is? And how many of you have had this feeling maybe for a long time? Now, a few of you are living that dream. A few of you know exactly what you're doing and why you're doing it, and you came here to do it. But there are many of us who did not come out with that in the beginning. I remember as a young woman, I went to every seminar, every workshop, and everywhere I went, I asked the person who looked wise to say, I know there's something I'm supposed to be doing, but what is it? And they said, just do it. And I say, do what? And they had no answer for me. There was no answer at all. And it took years, but I finally realized that that answer was within me. That there was a part of me that knew the answer to that question, and that question, in its perfect time, was answered. And all that was up to me in the meantime was to do what was in front of me and what was mine to do. And so, this is a very pertinent question for everyone who comes here, because most of us come to this earth forgetting why we came. We knew before we came. We've just forgotten. And so last week we talked about the book of Daniel, the story of Daniel, to illustrate that God can deliver us from any condition that we are willing to make ourselves receptive, when we are willing to make our selves receptive to cosmic law. And so in those years when I was waiting to find out what I was supposed to do with my life, I was studying cosmic law. That's what you're all doing now. You're studying, you're learning those laws so that you can adhere to them, so that when the time comes, you are ready to do whatever it is. But in the meantime, everything you're doing is perfect. It's absolutely perfect. It's exactly what you're supposed to be doing. So instead of having that longing, just know that what you're doing right now is perfect for you. It's going to take you where you want to go. And it may take you through some circuitous paths to get there. But you get there nonetheless, because you're already there. You see what I'm saying? It's a paradox, isn't it? It's a paradox. It truly is. This is the second part of our series, when we turn to the story of Esther to illustrate the greatness of our divine plan. Esther begins in the third year of the reign of King Xerxes in about 160 BCE. The emperor had a vast kingdom, and his kingdom spanned from Persia, Media, India, and Ethiopia. It was very, very great. And this was the year of the great celebration. And this great celebration lasted 6 months. Now, we had a celebration last night, and I thought, wouldn't it be nice if the celebration could go on for 6 months? We'd be awfully tired, but we would have had a good time. When it was over, the king gave a special party for the palace servants and for his staff, his officials. The party was quite a bash, and the king had quite a bit of wine, so he was feeling no pain. And one of the things that he decided that was a good idea, which probably wasn't, was to ask his beautiful wife, Queen Vashti, to come and be a part of the party. In Esther 1:10, it says, on the final day, when the king was half drunk from the wine, he told his eunuchs, who were his personal aides and friends, to summon Queen Vashti to him. And he wanted Queen Vashti to enter with the royal crown on her head so that all of the men could gaze upon her beauty, for she was a very beautiful woman. But then she surprises him, and she refuses to come. Well, no one refuses the king in those days, and in his drunkenness, he was very upset. And he called upon his advisors to advise him on what he should do to punish the queen for doing this terrible thing. Well, the advisors were all yes men, and they all wanted to please the king, and so they thought about the bigger picture, and they said to the king, you know, if she does this to you, the king, just think of all of the women and what they would do with their husbands if they knew. And so they advised the king to banish her and never be in his sight ever again. Well, a day was set as it was time for that to happen, and as the king sobered up, he realized he missed his wife. But there was really nothing he could do. It was an official edict that was going to be, that couldn't be changed. I'm not sure why, but it couldn't be changed. And so he said to his advisors, what am I going to do? He doesn't wise up too much. They never give him good advice, but he goes back anyway. And so the king realizes, even though that he misses her, he goes to the advisors, and the advisors tell him to find a new wife and to send out a call to all of the land to look for the most beautiful virgins and to bring them for the king to check out. This was the first beauty pageant. So now you know how it all began. Esther was one of the contestants, and what was their custom to do was, in order to prepare these young women to possibly be queen, they spent 12 months learning how the court works, and how to do their makeup probably, and how to do certain things that would please the king. Well, Esther was very, very smart, and so she was shrewd enough to seek the advice of the eunuch Haggai, who knew the king's tastes. So when she went before the king, she was totally prepared. And eventually, when she did go to the king, he was pleased so much that he set the royal crown on her head, and she became the queen in Vashti's place. And suddenly, Esther goes from being an orphan raised by her uncle, Mordecai, to an exalted position surrounded by all the trappings of wealth and power of an Eastern queen at her disposal. She had really arrived. Keep in mind that King Ahasuerus did not know that Esther was a Jew. And not long after her installation as queen, Esther's uncle, who raised her, Mordecai, overheard a plot to kill the king. And so what he did was he sent word to Esther to be sure to tell the king so that, it would not happen. And she did just that, and the people who were plotting were put to death, and it was put in the court annals, the warning that Mordecai had given. Well, God's plan is only beginning to percolate here. As you can see, extraordinary things have happened, and everything's being set up for a reason. The Jewish people were in captivity. They found themselves there a lot, and the reason for that is that the Jewish people represent, metaphysically, our spirituality. It represents our spirituality. So when we read about the Jews in the Bible, we're reading about our own spirituality, and that is how we apply these Bible stories to our lives. Otherwise, they're just nice stories, or they're exciting stories, or they're gory stories, or whatever they are, and they really don't mean a lot to us personally. They might have a moral story to them, but they're not a deep story. But as we look at them in a much, much deeper, more spiritual way, we see that there is a message for all of us. And so, the Jewish people are in captivity, and their existence is threatened by a man named Haman. Now, Haman is second in command to the king, and he's very full of himself, if you want to put it that way. He really thinks he's something else, and something happens one day with Mordecai. And what happens is he is threatened of Mordecai, because Mordecai will not bow before him when he meets him. He just refuses. Now, it's told to Haman that the reason Mordecai won't bow before him is because he's a Jew. Well, now, Jews don't bow before anyone but God. And so this is what we do. This is our spirituality. It's not going to bow before anything other than God. So this is due in part to something that Mordecai, did. So everybody's in trouble now because of Mordecai. And there's this feud that breaks out between the two of them because Haman is just infuriated. But Haman thought it beneath him to lay hands on Mordecai by himself. So, having been told who Mordecai's people were, Haman devises a plan to have the king issue an edict, putting all Jewish subjects to death for disloyalty. The Jews, said Haman, must be eliminated for the good of the kingdom. And the foolish king agreed, not knowing that Esther, his beloved queen, and Mordecai, the man to whom he owed his life, were both Jews. So a day is set aside for the slaughter. And a decree is issued to every part of the kingdom. So here we are, high drama happening. A whole race is going to be wiped out because of one man's pride. Mordecai sends word to Esther and tells her to plead for mercy from the king, because he knows that the king really loves her. And Mordecai represents that spiritual power working within each soul for its full redemption. So he is working out there to redeem the Jews, but inside, Mordecai within us is working for our own redemption, to bring us into a complete knowing of the Spirit within us. And so Esther sends word back to Mordecai to have the Jewish people fast for 3 days. They're to fast for 3 days to get ready and be ready for this terrible thing, and to be ready for the test that is coming. Now, metaphysically, we must abstain from error, thoughts, and outer conditions to prepare ourselves to meet the human will. And the king represents human will. Because he wants to think that what he says is law, and in the outer world, it's true. He is law. But if we look to the outer world, we will find that we are not going to find the things in life that we desire. Now, Esther is afraid because she knows that if she goes to the king without being summoned, she could be killed. So she has to think long and hard about whether she's going to do this or not. And so she starts to weigh in her mind, whether or not she's going to do this. But what she does is she prays and she surrenders. And she says in Esther 4:16, "So will I go unto the king, and if I perish, I perish." When we say, "Thy will be done," we are essentially saying to ourselves that we know that what we are doing is right. I don't know how many of you use that phrase. I use it a lot. "Thy will be done." It is a powerful phrase, an extremely powerful phrase that has a way of bringing to you the very highest and the best. If you believe, and if you follow the law, knowing that God's will for us is only good. So the king is receptive when she goes in, and he holds out his golden scepter for her to touch, and that means it's okay to talk. And he asks her, "What is your petition? What did you come here to ask me?" And she's very smart. He's very receptive to her, though. And and when she doesn't answer him, he says, I'll give you anything up to half of my kingdom." He's also kind of rash, isn't he? But here's where Esther is as wise as a serpent and gentle as a dove, in that she doesn't say anything at first. She just invites the king and Haman to dinner. And so she's kind of, this is real important. She can't just jump into it. She has to work her way into it gently. And I've found that in my own life that works way better than jumping in and making a decision, a rash one at that, and not having, the right outcome, the outcome that I want. So usually a lot of people don't like the fact that I don't answer them right away, but it always works out better in the long run. And so she has them to dinner. And Haman is just, even though he knows she's going to be one of the ones that's going to be killed, he is just really flattered. He is so flattered that she invited him to dinner with the king. He goes home and tells his family and all of his friends, he's really full of himself really at this point. But Haman, in the meantime, orders the gallows to be built to hang Mordecai. Thank you. I keep wanting to say another word. You know the word, and I'm not going to say it because if I do, I'll say it the rest of the time. Haman represents that part of us that wants to run the show, that likes flattery, and can be cruel to gain his own end. It is the nearsighted part of us that doesn't realize the law of cause and effect. So here we are. The gallows is being built, and he's going off to dinner with Esther with the thought in mind of killing her uncle. And as the story goes, Esther invited the king and Haman a second time to dinner. And it is here that she finally exposes Haman as the culprit who is trying to destroy the Jewish people and hang Mordecai, who had saved the king from assassination. And so it was that Haman was hanged on the gallows, that he had prepared for Mordecai, because the law always prevails, just as divine justice always prevails. It always does. The foundation and the structure of the book of Esther is steeped in irony. In the beginning of the story, those who are high become low, and those who are low become high, because Mordecai is made into he actually takes Haman's job. And so everything sort of flips. And Haman and even his sons are hanged on the very gallows that was prepared for Mordecai. The king is seen as human will without love to temper it, can act in uncaring ways, as evidenced by the signing of that edict. Esther is a valiant Jewish woman who saved her people when they were caught in a trap of nationwide pogrom. Esther is considered a prophet, she also represents a divine love. And so with her divine love, she was able to rise above the situation and change the situation. This book was written for the Jews who lived outside of Israel, to show them how to live in exile. If they encountered bigotry and prejudice, they must act with courage and integrity. But if we look at this metaphysically, it has a meaning for us too. When we live outside in the world, we have to stay in integrity with our positive thoughts and knowing what is right within us, whether it jeopardizes our life or not, or the peace, or whatever it is that is going on in the situation. So we see that from the story of Esther, that God had a plan for Esther. Who knew as a young orphan that she would become the queen of the entire kingdom? And Esther was a major part of that plan that was put together. Like Esther, our lives have deeper meaning than we can see on the surface. And like Esther, we can call upon all of our unity principles and all of our universal principles to fast and abstain from thoughts that seek only their own demands. We can set aside time to pray and to meditate. This is a very important time so that we really get in touch with the true part of us, the true part of who we are. It's really important that we do that and that we do it on a regular basis. And we affirm that divine love works in tandem with our will to produce a balanced life, because we do live. We live a spiritual life and we live a physical life. And it is up to us to balance those two in our lives. We can surrender our personal will and align with God's will to find the courage, the integrity, and the strength we need to do what is ours to do. We can choose each day to hold our highest impulse regardless of the consequences. And we can pray to know the difference between inspiration and temptation. And we can pray to know the highest and best purpose for us. And if we do this, what will be the outcome? If we do it, the entire universe will come together and rush to meet us. Not easy, but absolutely doable. So I have an affirmation for you this morning. Will you say that with me? My divine nature is a limitless source of courage and strength. Isn't that a wonderful lesson? Isn't it something that we can all use in our life this week? I hope that you find that it is, because in every life, as it says, a little rain must fall, and when it falls, we will have these principles to shield us. God bless you. And so it is.